Alright. So, thank you everyone for coming today. Does someone want to start off by giving a prayer?
I can say it. Our Father in heaven is so grateful for this day. Thankful for the weather we've been having here in Rexburg. Father, we ask you that the Spirit will be with us as we talk about this case study, that will enlighten us on what to discuss. We love you, Father, and we say these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Amen.
Okay, so personally, I thought that this was like the best case study that we've done so far, just because I felt like everything was super clear. It was, I don't know, I just thought it was a lot easier than the other ones that we have been doing. What are you guys' thoughts so far? Like, was it better or no?
I didn't like it at all.
That is loud.
Way better.
They had us like come up with like all these scenarios and ways to like make improvements in NASA. Like, we're no scientists, so like I feel like none of my reasoning would even be considered if I was part of NASA, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, I liked it because, yeah, we don't know any of the scientific stuff behind it, but from a business perspective, it was
like clear what the problem was.
Yeah, you could see what the
I
problem
don't even know what the problem was. The only problem I found was like the foam coming off the rocket ships or the shuttles. Like, maybe communication, like the scientists and engineers had no say in postponing the launch because of this problem. I think that NASA just wanted to reach this deadline, so they didn't care about the factors that would come, like 18 astronauts dying or billions of dollars going to waste after 73 seconds of launch.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I just totally thought it was all this communication. I mean, they even talked about how like the two groups that were in charge of foam, the DAT and the MAT, like never once even talked to each other in person. And like, that's a huge problem. If you're going to send people to space and those two groups aren't even going to talk to each other, that's crazy. And then they just talked about how even later there weren't emails sent through because there wasn't like specific verification that it was like from some certain person. So I just think like not having contact and communication was the biggest problem in here, and it just shows that like even the small and simple things are important even when it comes to literally outer space.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. The thing for me is I think there was a lot of miscommunication, but at the same time, there was a lot of pressure. You know, you have people in space, you know, and before the launch or during the launch, something went wrong. Obviously, foam hit the shuttle, and now you have people, you know, hundreds of miles away from the Earth, and you have a deadline within that because they're gonna need to come back. They're gonna be low on supplies. They're gonna be, you know, they have to come back eventually, and so there's a lot of pressure. And I think that kind of created some of the miscommunication because, you know, there's leaders there who are like, okay, this isn't normal. We need to fix this, you know. And at the same time, they had foam hit other shuttles before that, and nothing happened. So they might have also gotten a little lazy and said, it's happened before, no big deal. You know, they'll come back fine, right? So,
well, I think that.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, it glitched out there. What were you saying?
They just might have gotten a little lazy and thought it was no big deal.
Oh, yeah, I think it also didn't help that they didn't have proper like surveillance. Mm-hmm. That way they could actually tell how bad it was. Because, like it said in there, like the majority of the cameras weren't working properly, and they hadn't done anything to maintain them for like, I think it said like a year.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that definitely doesn't help. Because then, you know, you can actually see it beforehand and stop the launch, you know?
I think that all kind of wraps around what Chad was talking about, how they discussed that they had some sort of like Russian roulette outlook on this. And I think that that's a huge mistake. There's a few times that it's gonna work. That's like a really scary thing to even consider. Like if someone sees airplanes in certain way and they're like, oh well, that airplane was fine once, it'll be fine again. But like when they see this problem, that's like super bad.
There we go. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, that's a lot better. We didn't hear what you were saying.
I know I could hear the noise. I didn't know if you could hear me though.
Oh, it's all good. Look at Michael. He's laughing.
Because, gosh dang it, Michael.
Michael, if you want to speak, you gotta unmute yourself. Punishment for Oh darn, I can't talk.
What?
He wrote that. Anyways, what were you saying again? Sorry, Ellie.
No, I was just talking about the Russian roulette. I just thought it was really stupid. All right, let's do some questions. So, these questions, you all know I didn't make them up, but so it says like what was the recovery window in this case, and so obviously it was the time between the problem of the phone and the after launch. So we kind of talked about that and like how the problem was that the cameras didn't work.
Yeah.
They should have definitely had that done before. That's why with this case study, I thought it was so easy because it was like so easy to tell when all these people were in the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But okay. So why did the debris strikes become an acceptable risk? Like why did people think it was fine to go anyways? We talked about that.
Because it just kept happening over and over again and they just didn't care enough to fix it.
Exactly.
Most people would see something falling off of a giant rocket and be like, oh no, that's not a good thing. But for some reason they were like, oh, it's in the acceptable parameters. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, like, I don't know. I wouldn't say that they didn't like research into it because they say that like after extensive and like painstaking, they just couldn't figure out why it was happening or whatever. Which is like, you know, like, did they really though? But at the same time, I think to some degree they kind of lost focus on what they were doing. Part of like the danger of like data is that you forget that purpose and you forget what you're actually dealing with. And so I think when they're like doing all this statistics and everything, yeah, sure, it might be statistically low of a chance that it might cause something big, but you're still playing with people's lives right now. And so they didn't really, I felt like they kind of looked more at the numbers and not actually what was happening in the real world. Because the numbers might say that there's a low chance of anything bad happening, but there's still that chance of something bad happening. And so they kind of created this culture of like, oh, it just doesn't create anything bad. So then when it did create something bad, no one even thought that it would create something bad.
Totally.
NASA's an interesting organization because a lot of what they do is based off of theory. And so if, you know, they can only do so many tests until they actually put something into real life and see what happens. And then at the same time, they have a lot of deadlines to meet, a lot of money being spent, you know, that they don't necessarily have, I would say. And they're trying to work with they try to work with the best people they have, because some people maybe aren't available, or some people maybe, like it said in the article, one guy had only worked with a machine like twice. I don't know if you guys remember that. I forget what the machine was called, but Crater or something.
Some analytic program.
Yeah.
Crater, yeah.
Crater, yeah. And so like these people, they're working with the best that they have, and obviously they're not going to be perfect, and mistakes are bound to be made, which is it's very unfortunate that they had to happen this way, but now they know for future.
Mm-hmm. What are your guys' thoughts of the Columbia, like that entire idea? What do you think of it? Like shuttling people to space. I know it's kind of different considering.
He's wearing a NASA shirt. Oh, that's awesome.
I came just on time, right?
Yeah, you're good.
So, yeah, I was at an accounting meeting. Actually, when I got to the accounting meeting, they had a guy there on Skype, and he was like, hey, can you see this? And he's like, hey, it's NASA guy. And I'm like, so then you just said that now, and I'm just like, what?
That's so funny.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go back to the conversation.
Yeah, what was your question?
No, I just asked, like, what are your guys' thoughts about the Columbia? Would you ever, like, participate in something like that if they ever got everything figured out?
100%. My life is already bad enough on this earth. I'm just joking, but like, come on, like,
yeah.
To some degree, also, just to say that you died in a freaking rocket, like when you get to heaven, you can brag about that crap. Like,
well, are we saying we like get involved in the Columbia? Like, in what sense? Like, I don't like. I don't want to die, but like, it'd be cool to go to space, like.
Yeah.
I know each shuttle was like created for a specific mission. So like Apollo going to the moon, or I don't know, just doing like getting men into space. So I don't know, did Columbia even have a mission? What was their purpose of?
So Columbia, basically the whole space shuttle program was to make reusable rocketry.
Yeah, they wanted it to be reusable for like 100 years or something.
So, like, basically each shuttle should be able to launch into space 100 times before it has to be decommissioned. And the whole thought process was that you can send up more stuff and also, like, build a space station, and also it's going to be cheaper. Their whole thing was, like, it's going to be cheaper than, like, having a non-reusable rockets. So, like, but the problem was, like, it didn't really work out, and then there's a lot of budget constraints. And I don't know. I really like space. I have a NASA shirt. I really like this stuff. Like, from my point of view, even before we started reading it, I already knew in my mind the shuttle program was actually a really terrible program compared to Apollo. It just was super expensive. A lot of failures, a lot of issues. They should have went with something else. So from the beginning, I'm not really like for. I think the shuttle was great, but at the same time, just wasn't executed right.
So when do you think the problem started?
When NASA became a thing.
Well, I think NASA started having issues once they started deviating from, well, like, why do you think SpaceX and now even NASA are trying to build rockets that aren't shuttles? They're just like capsules. It's for a reason. It's because the space shuttle is just not something we can really do now. They don't have the technology. So I think it was just doomed from the beginning.
I think like it kind of started the Challenger. I talked a lot about like groupthink in my I'm psychology major, so that was like the first thing I thought of.
Why are you taking this class if you're a psychology major?
Because I'll go into HR and I'll get my MBA.
Oh, okay.
I'm just not a business student because you guys suck.
I'm not a business student. So.
Yeah, you're accounting. You're cool. No, just joking. But I think like Challenger kind of showed that like they weren't really receptive to like outside ideas or ideas that weren't really aligned with what they were doing, because the Challenger, like I've done it in my stats classes, like the statistics with this, like there was like a 1 in like a million shot of it actually succeeding, and they still went with it because of kind of like what I was talking about, faulty communication, but also there's just this idea that like we just had to do this. Like we didn't want someone to say no. Right. And I think that's when it's really started to create this problem of we have to do whatever is like not told of us, but we have to do whatever is the group is doing. You don't want to be the person saying no, and if you are the person saying no, we're not going to count you as saying no, and we're not going to give you any credit or research or resources to prove that you're saying
no. I also think, like, another issue with NASA and the whole thing was that, like it says, the bureaucracy. So like there's expectations met, and like if they don't meet certain expectations, Congress is going to defund them. There's all these pressures and all these things to like, oh, we need to launch this, or else like it's gonna look bad and like internationally. And I think more than anything in my paper, I really tackled the fact that they're more willing to like risk, like they let their pride and their reputation go before the safety of a human life.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of that, okay, why are you trying to like prove that like nothing's gonna go wrong? Like, why do I have to prove to you that like something can go wrong, and not prove like how it's gonna go right? So basically, he's like saying, hey, like this is gonna happen like wrong. This is a possibility. They're like, well, prove to me it's gonna go wrong, or else it's probably gonna work right. Like that just it seems stupid. That's like the whole thing, and it's like they just tackled the whole thing wrong, you know. And like I think if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but like that little piece of foam they put on there that only happens on that left side, like they don't even need it. Like they could have done without it, I think. And so if they just would have removed it, like it wouldn't have caused the problem. Like it's so many dumb things that like that are involved in it. It's just
So that kind of applies to the question that I was supposed to ask next when it says how do you characterize the culture at NASA? So I mean, it just pretty much explains what you just said, you know.
There's a reason that SpaceX is doing what SpaceX is doing and NASA is not doing what SpaceX is doing.
Right.
Well, NASA's not a thing, right?
NASA's
2011.
NASA's still doing a lot of research. They just don't do a lot with space. Like they don't do a lot with like space, like missiles.
They don't have
anymore.
rockets.
Yeah, they still do a lot with like planetary and like research and physics and everything like that.
So anytime when NASA wants to send an astronaut to space, they have to go through Russia's Soyuz program.
Wow.
Which has been a rocket they've been using since the 60s and 70s, and it still works flawlessly.
Interesting.
So who really won the race?
I'm just saying, not like pro-Russia or anything. I'm just saying, like.
But no, like NASA has its role now, but there's a reason. It's because it's not an innovative organization. I mean, to be blunt, it's part of the government. So
they are building a new rocket with Boeing, though. That's supposed to be the most powerful rocket. Like it's gonna be like as powerful as the Saturn V. So like they are trying to get back into it. It's just they're not really doing anything right now.
Yeah, it's not their number one priority.
I feel like Dallin has answered all of these questions in his rant about hate for NASA because the Mike says who is accountable and why. But obviously we know it's NASA because they suck.
Well, NASA's good. It had poor decisions.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the pressure of being the first, or the pressure of making deadlines or whatever. I think that's the reasons why they make bad decisions.
They're just blinded by that.
And also because a lot of stuff is theory. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, I was just saying, especially when you're being run and watched over by the government, like you have different like rules or whatever you want to call it that you have to follow. Yeah. And so, if it's a corporation, quite often corporations are like, oh yeah, we have this cool new thing coming out, but it's not quite right, so we're going to put it off for another year to make sure it is right. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the things that the government does, it's like, it's not completely, good, but it's good enough, so we're just going to go with it anyways.
That's true. Yeah, good point.
Even though it's like, it's probably not the best idea.
Yeah. That's kind of like with the cameras. Like, they obviously knew they didn't have the best equipment going out to space, but they're like, let's just do it anyways.
Well, I think what's kind of crazy, too, is it talks about how the agency itself, the bureaucracy, is like, didn't care about the warnings. But if I remember correctly, the private team that went into researching what happened to it while it was in flight was made up of like a private group from Boeing. Like the people who made the rocket, which was Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, I don't know what other companies were. But like they were trying to solve it, and then like there was just no communication between NASA, like the mission control team, and the group who worked on the aircraft.
Exactly. That's what we talked about before you got there, was like the two specific groups that work with foam strike, which was like the DAT and the MAT. They never once talked like face to face or anything like that. And I think when it comes to being successful at anything, like you need to be able to have meetings multiple times to be able to understand that, like, everyone's on the same page and this is how this works. So I just thought that like reading that to me was crazy, because I mean when you're growing up and like, you know, you just think NASA's like the coolest place ever, but they can't even have meetings correctly and share information like that. So I thought that was crazy.
Yeah. One thing that got brought up about corporation versus government type of industry, I think a good point to be made here is also that no, I don't think any private corporation would ever like take on the task of what NASA does, because it's not profitable. You spend a ton of money and there's very little return. You know, if I'd be willing to bet there's no return. You know, you're sending rockets up for research. What do you gain from that? You know, so and I think that has a big part to do with the culture of NASA as well. You know, they're not profitable, but they do get, I guess, like bragging rights to say, oh yeah, we found out this or we did this, you know. So just another point.
I get that. I also thought it was crazy how the Columbia was like minutes away from making it. To me, it was just like kind of like irony. Like they were so close to being able to like being successful to this, but they were just like.
One thing that a question I had was, so on the descent, they said that they couldn't read the temperature of the wings, right? Because they think the foam. But I was thinking, so let's say they could read the temperature of the wings. What difference would that have made?
Well, they talked about how earlier, like when they were going to send something off in Florida, but it was too cold and it messes with like the metals and like the speed at which the metals are moving at. That's what they were talking about.
For the Challenger,
because it was too cold.
Interesting. I think when I was talking about the wing, it's just the fact they knew there's an issue when the wing wasn't reading the temperatures properly.
Oh, so you're saying there could be something else, maybe like a piece of the wing missing or something as well?
Well, so like did you watch, so I went and watched some videos about the foam strike.
Yeah.
And I watched the test they did with the same materials, and they launched it. It just looks like a piece of foam. It's like literally foam. They launched it at 500 miles per hour, and it literally blew a massive hole. And like the same material that part of the wing was made out of. So I think it's just pointing the fact that they notice, hey, there's something's not reading up correctly.
Gotcha.
And so NASA's like, hey, can you check this? And they're like, so like right when they're about to check it, like they blew up.
Gotcha.
So I feel like Dallin could probably correct me on this because he's like NASA guru. So I just did some research into it because I was really curious. And apparently they knew that it wasn't going to succeed. But mission control had to make the decision to either tell the astronauts that they're about to die or just let them die without them knowing that was about to happen.
Oh, wow.
Because I think they knew, like, kind of when... So it kind of talks about how, like, they had all this discussion on the wing, the foam, and everything. And then it kind of just goes into, oh, yeah, and then they blew up on the way in. But I think on the way in, there was at that point, I think it was like 20 minutes out, they knew that it wasn't going to be successful, or they knew that something serious was going on. And they had to make the decision to either tell the astronauts and have the astronauts expect their death or just to have them instantly die. Which I think is like, because I mean, that's another hard pressure. It's like, if you're in space, like, how do you fix something? Like, even if there is the error, and even if they did know about the foam error, then you still have to go into, okay, let's solve the error. And
There's
so if
ways
they,
to solve it.
and if there was no way to solve it, then then you kind of get into that ethics dilemma of should we have told the astronauts or should we not have told the astronauts that they're about to die and make that whole day or however far along miserable for them because they know that they're gonna die.
So
that's a
you
good
guys
point.
have told them or no?
What?
Would you have told them or no?
I honestly, I don't think I would have told someone. Personally, I would hate for someone to be like, "Hey, you have a day left to live."
Yeah, I agree. I probably wouldn't have told the astronauts, but at the end of the case study, they say that they announced that it had nothing to do with that. So then that's kind of just
they still never took credit for the phone.
Yeah, they never took
still
credit.
deny it.
Right.
Which is still kind of amazing because it's
He said he denied it because he couldn't believe it, but then they did the test and it proved out to be that's what it was. So, I think it's more of he's like, I can't believe it's that. It can't be that. And it was.
Yeah, everything else looked fine except for that one thing, but we still know it's not that one thing.
I don't know. It just kind of annoys me because there was another shuttle that was gonna be launched soon, and they could have probably launched it if they really needed to. They could have done it, and or they could have called up Russia to probably send up a Soyuz capsule. There's ways that they could have done something. I might have been crazy to even try it, but they could have at least tried. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally. I agree.
So I don't know. Seems silly.
So it says, what principles, if any, from this lesson's reading apply to this case? So
apply to what?
To this case, but
have y'all read the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? Yeah.
Started to.
Are we supposed to?
No, it's just for the discussion board. I read it while giving blood today.
Oh, okay.
I just finished the pages today.
Yeah, there was no freaking reading, which also pissed me off. Yeah. And you all will read about it, but in the book, it kind of talks about how sometimes it's better to put your team or your organization above the profits or above the goals of the company. It kind of hints at that idea. And I think NASA should have taken a good 6 months or a certain amount of time to be okay, we're not shooting off any more rockets, we're not doing anything, we are finding out what the internal problem is. Because if you think about profits will come, they'll always come, but if you have a bad team or a toxic culture, then profits will come, but at what cost? You're probably going to have a higher cost. And unfortunately, we saw that with NASA, with the lives that were lost, and all the money and billions of dollars that was lost in a few seconds. But sometimes it's better to just take the time to be no, we got to fix what's going on in us before we can start focusing more on the future goals of the company or organization.
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Nice.
Well,
that basically answers the discussion board, so copy all that down. And you don't have to read now.
Still actually a pretty good read, though.
No, I love the way he structured that book. I was ooh, I'm getting into this.
Oh, I know. This book is so much better than that last one that we were reading. I actually feel I'm learning something from this one, while the other one I was just reading it for the sake of reading it.
Yeah. It got me into it. I was ooh, I want to keep reading. I gotta know what happens to her.
Well, thank you everyone for participating and coming today.
Yeah.
No problem.
So annoying.
You guys make the case studies a lot easier. But
yeah. I was watching a group meeting on YouTube. I don't know, I just found one and it was so boring. This is actually way better. So thanks for being
guys. Let's be real here.
Michael's funny, man. He's always one to make the comments that none of us want to make.
being serious. So boring.
True.
Anyways, I will see you guys next week.
All right.
Oh wait,
Later, homies.
I'll send you the link, Ellie, and then you can post it.
Thank you so much.
All right, sounds good.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.